This video is a response to a discussion between former fighter pilot Chris Lehto and thermal camera technician Dave Falch. In that discussion, Dave claims to debunk my rotating glare hypothesis for the gimbal video, and Chris claims to understand this. I'll demonstrate that neither claim is true. But first, let's start by establishing some facts. Firstly, this is an example of infrared glare that obscures an entire plane. It's from the Chilean Navy UFO case that was solved in 2017. It's an Airbus A340 Iberia Flight 6830. In infrared, we see only large glares around the engine, and we can't see the plane, so infrared glare exists. Secondly, this is a narrow field of view. 1,000mm focal length, the plane is over 60 miles away, so infrared glare that obscures an airplane exists in narrow field of view. Thirdly, the shape of a glare is relative to the camera, so if you rotate the camera, the scene rotates, but the glare will stay in the same orientation in the video. You can demonstrate this with a phone pointing at a flashlight. Rotate the phone, and in the video the background rotates, but the glare does not. Fourthly, a derotation mechanism will rotate the entire image, glare and all, and will have no effect on the orientation of the glare within the scene. What does that mean? Well, the AppFLIR camera system is mounted inside a pod that must rotate to keep tracking an object, but the pilot does not want the image on screen rotating. They want the horizon on their screen to match the horizon through the window. So there's a derotation mechanism built in to correct that. It simply rotates the entire image back so the horizon is in the right place. Finally, if you derotate an image in which the background has rotated but the glare has not rotated, then it's going to look like the glare rotates but the background doesn't. We can demonstrate that by using the same video from earlier. The simplest way to derotate it is just to film it with another camera. Now the image remains stable, but the glare seems to rotate. To recap, infrared glare exists. It can cover a plane. It exists even in narrow field of view. Glare shape is relative to the camera. Rotating the camera rotates the scene but not the glare, so the angle of the glare relative to the scene changes. Derotating the image rotates everything the same amount. Derotating an image where the background has rotated but the glare has not will make it look like the background has not rotated but the glare has rotated. Okay, now let's get into Dave's debunking. First of all, Dave agrees with me about the function of the derotation mechanism.
And so why do you need that, I guess?
Like, let's say you have your gimbal and it's rotating. You don't want the scene to rotate to the side, so you have a derotation counteract that. It's going to rotate the whole scene.
Okay, so we're all in agreement. The derotation mechanism rotates the entire scene, and it's there to keep the horizon in the right place. So let's see Dave's objection.
The big thing is refraction versus reflection, because he likes talking about how the big glare that he's talking about, it's something to do where there's already an existing glare, and then he theorizes that the gimbal moves, and then like a derotation device counteracts the rotation of the gimbal moving. But what I'm saying is, even if that glare existed, which it doesn't, but if that glare existed, it's going to rotate the whole scene opposed to refracting. If you have a lens like this is like a silicone, then you might have some refraction with the glare. You have the lens moving. But the derotation device that he touches on, it's not that at all. It's a couple mirrors like this that are going to rotate the whole scene. So the object can't independently rotate on its own magically like this glare that he's hypothesizing with.
Follow that? He says the derotation device rotates the whole scene, which is what I say. Then he says, as opposed to refracting, which doesn't really make any sense, but it's also irrelevant, as he's just agreed with me that the derotation mechanism rotates the entire scene, including the glare, by the same amount. Remember what we established earlier. Glare shape is relative to the camera. If the camera rotates, the scene will rotate, but the glare will not. Derotating the entire image makes it look like the scene is not rotating, but the glare is rotating. How does Chris respond to this?
So the way I understand it is that it's coming in, and so there's a glare somehow on the lens but it's not it rotates, right? And so the actual the image is the same, right? It's seeing the image, but since the glass is rotating on top of it, that changes just the glare, but not really all the other image which is seen normally. That's the way I understand it.
Well, kind of. Glare isn't something that's on the lens. Glare is a scattering of light or radiation around a very bright radiation source. A lens, window, or mirror has imperfections, so a small portion of the light gets scattered. The amount and direction of this scattering is defined by the glare spread function, which is also called the point spread function. But I think what he's trying to convey here is that the glare has already rotated relative to the horizon because the camera has rotated. Dave's response to this is interesting.
Okay, we'll touch on that. There's going to be two different sensors. There's going to be a daylight camera sensor, which is going to utilize the sapphire glass. Then there's going to be the infrared sensor that's it's going to have this kind of glass, a germanium or a silicone or some other type of semiconductor metalloid. So what they're doing there is heat doesn't travel through just glass, sapphire glass. It actually blocks it. So if you're trying to run from the cops, one of your best places to hide is probably a greenhouse, just nothing but glass.
Sounds legit, right? As Dave is the IR expert, right? Wrong. The Lockheed Martin sniper targeting pod that Chris is probably familiar with actually uses a sapphire glass window, specifically because sapphire glass is transparent to both visible light and medium wave infrared. The lantern and at-flare pods use zinc sulfide, which is similar to germanium in that it's transparent to the long-wave infrared. However, it's also transparent to visible light. Germanium is opaque. So there Dave's misunderstanding something fairly significant. So Dave's objection doesn't really make any sense. And to his credit, Chris later admits he didn't really understand what Dave is saying and asked him to clarify.
I don't understand that argument, actually. Can you go through that again, please?
So the derotation device is something similar to this. You can see when I turn it, it rotates the whole scene.
It rotates opposite the sensor so that the sensor always sees the correct up and down. Is that what you're saying?
Sure. And that's what his big argument was at first until I showed him on with it using his own example. The at-flare PDF, I think he found online somewhere that showed what the internals were, like internal schematics. And I said, well, that derotation device, it explains that it's a mirror. It's an infrared mirror, which you're not going to have on anything like this. These are all internal optics of at-flare or flares that you're not going to have any exposure to them unless you're somebody like myself or John. If that makes any sense.
Notice he doesn't really make any points here, and then ends it with an argument to authority. The John he refers to is John Earhart, who had a similar misunderstanding that I covered in another video. Chris recognizes both this appeal to authority and the lack of a point, and presses him some more.
Basically, you're saying that, well, first, you actually work on these things, so you can be considered to know what you're, at least the internals. But now that derotation device, so the fact so how does that counteract his original argument?
And Dave fails to provide any answer.
Because he was thinking that the derotation device was something like this that was a lens that would turn. And so if you already have an existing glare, then this lens could rotate the glare because of the refraction opposed to the reflection of a mirror.
Chris, unfortunately, pretty much gives up here.
I get it. Okay, I understand.
No, you don't understand. So once you see that Dave really doesn't have a point with the derotation, or a point with the refraction versus reflection, or a point with glass versus germanium, then all that's left is this argument that you don't get glare in IR like this, but we've already seen with the Chilean case that you do. This unfortunately has been an argument that's been going around for years. Dave is ostensibly an expert, even though he's never worked on targeting pods, and he didn't know that sapphire glass was IR transparent, but he doesn't really understand my arguments. And since his debunking doesn't really make any sense, then Chris's claim that he understands is also a little suspect. Sorry, Chris. Check it out.